Hey, Earthlings!
Oh, greetings!
We're on the air. I think we're live, folks. So hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our regular animal rights show, which seems to be getting more irregular with the comments and the content, and also the timing of it. So welcome along. As you can see, we have a special guest panelist. And Wendy, I believe you're going to do the intros.
Yes, I'm going to introduce Carolyn. So welcome, Carolyn, and thank you so much for coming to do the show with us. So here's a little bit about Carolyn. She became a vegan animal rights activist in 2010. She started her first animal advocacy blog just over a year later, when she was just 15 years old. And in the following years, volunteered with the National Capital Vegetarian Association and Vegan Option Canada. In 2019, recognizing that radical and abolitionist messaging is needed in order to end animal exploitation, Carolyn founded Always for Animal Rights, a radio show and podcast based at a community radio station in Ottawa, Canada. In addition to veganism and animal rights, she is passionate about the natural world, feminism, anti-consumerism, reading, and holistic critical thinking. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thanks for having me here today.
Hi, Carolyn.
Pleasure.
Yeah, so, right. Well, what happens now, folks? We've not done this for so long. I don't know.
I think you just press a few buttons, something like that.
Okay, I can do that. Okay. Well, we'll say a few of those if you like. So the first one in was Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. How are you doing? And the ape has arrived. So Jeremy's here. And the monkey has arrived.
Trouble. Yeah. Trouble there.
I know, yeah. And Deb. So Deb. Welcome, Deb. Now, in terms of the way this all works, for people who've forgotten, like ourselves, the best chat is on this channel, my channel on YouTube. But if you are tuning in on Facebook, we can see your comments, but you won't be able to see the chat. So if you want to have the full experience, then transfer to my YouTube channel. And then in terms of the comments, then do send them in. We always engage with the comments, and we don't charge for that. We'll never do that. So feel free to comment as you please. No charge involved.
Dennis.
We've got Dennis. Yes, hi, Dennis from Galway. I should be seeing you at the weekend, Dennis. Dennis has got a demo. And then we've got Kate and Deirdre. So people are streaming in. That's good. So thank you very much for joining us. As I said on our regular thing, we're a little bit out of practice, if we're honest about this, really, aren't we? But okay, so we've got. This is one of the shows that I really like because it's kind of movement issues, really. And there's been this thing. In the movement about whether there's a thing that we've all been a bit concerned about, which is the way that veganism has been slimmed down. And so one aspect of that is that environmental issues are not an issue for the movement, which goes against everything that the pioneers ever said. So I don't know whether anyone wants to make any general points about that, because that just flies in the face of the founders of our movement, really.
Yeah. Well, when I first became a vegan, I kind of intuitively knew that there was a connection between having respect for ecosystems and having respect for non-human animals. When I was about 13, I read Watership Down right before I went vegan. So I sort of could see that connection through reading that book. But I didn't necessarily think that veganism necessarily required us to practice respect for ecosystems. I thought that the two things were interconnected, but not necessarily the same thing. Over the years that I've been hosting my show, though, I've really come to feel that respect for ecosystems is an integral part of animal liberation and veganism.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that. And we're going back to Richard Adams and Did you engage with the plague dogs as well? The other book.
Yeah, I read that around the time I went vegan.
Yeah, because that's even more powerful, isn't it? And for people who know, we talk about Richard Adams, the author. He actually was a guest speaker at a demo that I organised in Harrogate years and years ago when we were doing the Hazleton campaign. That's a vivisection laboratory. But yeah, well-known author, Watership Down. And the pop quiz question about Watership Down is when the animated film was made in London, it was done on Warren Street. So that's a nice little kind of pop quiz kind of knowledge. But then there's also Plague Dogs, which is on YouTube still now. Again, animated, but it's very powerful stuff. Now, we've got a couple of PowerPoints set up. So we're going to start with this one that Carolyn has provided, if I can remember which button to press. Yes, okay. So we're just going to kind of go through these and just really chat about them rather than being a formal presentation. But the first one you chose, Carolyn, was Leslie Cross. So
yeah, I was trying to choose some quotes that sort of, beginning in the 1940s, leading up to approximately the present day, just to show how the vegan movement has always included a concern for ecosystems in the natural world. And yeah, I think, I guess I'll just read out this quote. He said, "We err, and we err greatly, when we limit the application of abiding principles to one section of the world's inhabitants. Animals share with us the habitation of this globe, and they are as entitled as we to the benefits of a natural and developmental evolution."
Yeah, I love that quote. And I'm just wondering, Carolyn, when you said on your radio show over the years you shifted your perspectives on this, is there anything in particular that kind of helped you to see that it was much more important to respect ecosystems, or that kind of pushed that shift for you? Anything?
I think well, I think it was a few different factors. I mean, certainly the work of the author Lee Hall has definitely had a big impact on me, but there have been other influences as well. Ecofeminism, for example, and critical animal studies, etc.
Yeah, great.
It seems reasonable and natural to include free living beings and ecosystems in our moral concern. I mean, first of all, these fellow animals are harmed because of human activity. So why should we, care only about some species that are harmed by humans and not some other species? And then I'm thinking that if we start excluding species from our sphere of moral concern, then we open the door to all kinds of prejudice and isms and oppression. So I really cannot see how someone can be vegan and then exclude free living beings or any species from their advocacy.
I think part of the problem is that some advocates are suggesting that veganism is only about opposing non-human exploitation, and since somebody was saying that if our fellow animals are being bombed, it's not a vegan issue because they're not being exploited, and that just seems really incorrect, basically.
They're harmed, though. I mean,
yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe they're not being exploited, but they're still being oppressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's ironic, considering the roots of the vegan movement being just during the war and the whole effort to it's actually a peace movement, and peace movement that includes non-human species as well. So it's kind of flies in the face of you know, what the founders were actually envisaging is this huge, you know, amazing, the greatest movement on earth, as they called it, just to paraphrase. But
yeah, and so in this quote by Leslie Cross, when he says that other animals are entitled to the benefits of a natural and developmental evolution, it seems clear that that's only possible if we're not destroying their habitats.
yeah.
There was another Leslie Cross quote from a few years later where he said, in a nutshell, basically, that in a vegan world, our fellow animals would be reintegrated within the balance of nature. So again, in order for that to be possible, we as humans need to respect the balance of nature and not destroy it.
I love how you used "in a nutshell" for the squirrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems, and I suppose we here on this show, and probably the viewers that are watching now, we kind of feel that it doesn't make any sense not to have respect for ecosystems and free living animals, as well as you know, the non-humans that we kind of you know, so-called breed and kill, you know, for consumption or for testing and all those things. It seems nonsensical that we wouldn't consider that as part of our veganism. Yeah, for me, it's kind of, it seems funny that we have to even talk about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, maybe we should go to the next slide. Oh, this is an interesting question from Deb. Have I encountered difficulties in discussions with environmentalists regarding veganism? Yeah, I have. I mean, I used to be a member of the Ontario Nature, well, probably shouldn't name the group, but anyway, it's too late. The Ontario Nature...
Name and shame.
Well, I used to be involved with the Ontario Nature Youth Council. This was a number of years ago. I don't know what they're like nowadays. Maybe they've changed their approach. But yeah, it was mixed. They did let me prepare these brochures about the environmental impacts of animal agribusiness, and they distributed them in the swag bags for a conference that they held. So they did do that. But there was also, you know, I was trying to encourage them to stop serving. I mean, back then I wasn't necessarily taking a consistent abolitionist approach, so I was trying to get them to stop serving animal flesh at their events, and I was told, no, we don't want to restrict people's options. So I didn't get very far with that, but yeah, so it was a mixed bag.
Yeah, Jeremy's question is a bit more nuanced even than that, which is, I think the challenge is getting the focus to be on our fellow animals, as many species will interpret environmentalists to be about humans, environmentalism, I mean, especially if they don't have respect for fellow animals. I'm not sure about, I mean, don't we always think about free living beings, at least, when we think about environmentalism?
Well, I think a lot of the time people have this messaging where they sort of say, well, we don't want humans to go extinct, so we have to take better care of the planet. But of course, we can approach protecting ecosystems from a non-anthropocentric perspective as well.
Yeah, I do know that one of the problems in the early days when I was vegan was the conservationists obviously focused on species. We were focused on individuals, but also when they did talk about the value of free living beings and they wanted to stop their extinction, for example, it was because they would then not have these beings to show their children, for example. So it always did come back to humans. So I think Jeremy is right in that respect.
Yeah, but I think it's also, there are some people in the vegan community who I think have made the mistake of thinking that so-called environmental concerns are just about humans, when in fact it doesn't have to be that way at all.
Okay, we do have our first challenge, I think. Veganism is about the abolition of exploitation and commodification of non-human animals by humans. Veganism does not pertain to occurrences between free living. Well, I mean, that is the kind of negative utilitarian kind of point, isn't it? Occurrences between free living animals or about benefits to the oppressors.
Well, yes. I mean, I wouldn't say that we ought to try to stop natural predation, for example. I know there are some people who have suggested that we should do that, but I think that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no evidence that human beings are any good at it for a start, you know, this kind of micromanagement of free living beings. But these points are not connected. The first point is not connected to the second. So we would probably agree with the second point, but not necessarily with the first, I would think. So,
well, I think we kind of agree with that is part of veganism. I would say the first point is part of what veganism is. It's an important part.
Well, it's the focus of it. I would suggest, but not all of it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's move on to that.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
yeah, this was just another Leslie Cross quote.
I thought I got rid of that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, so Catherine Nimmo co-founded the first vegan society in the United States, which was active between 1948 and 1960. And so, yeah, in 1961, she wrote, "Veganism is a practical expression of the oneness of all life. Veganism is basic, as it would not only do away with slaughter, vivisection, hunting, fishing, but no doubt also with human exploitation." And I like this quote because I think when she says that veganism is basic, she's pointing to the fact that veganism is a principle that can be applied to different things. What do you all think about this quote?
Yeah, it's a little bit too close to me to ahimsa, and my worry there is that when you talk about, you know, reverence for life, it gets you into all kinds of trouble with regard to plants, in terms of you know, whether they're sentient and therefore rights bearers and that kind of thing. So I think there can be a bit of a danger there, but it's not a major kind of problem for me. But whenever I see phrases like the oneness of all life, it makes me think of that point.
And yet it is, and yet there is a lot of truth in it, which is why ecosystems are so important and biodiversity, because everything is connected, everyone is connected, including obviously the plants that sustain the animals on the planet. So it's kind of, I know it's a little bit of a kind of gritty area for us, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's the rights thing that gets in the way of that, I suppose, in a way. Whereas I guess in eco-feminist terms, all life is important, plant life, animal life, but it's not about, and ecofeminism doesn't advocate for rights as such anyway, but it's about caring for communities of animals and also communities of plants that sustain those animals as well. So it fits more into that biodiversity ecosystem kind of ethos of care. I suppose it fits more that with that ecofeminist stance. Would you agree with that, Carolyn?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, I guess I see that, like, yeah, I don't see why we can't. I mean, I actually personally don't use that term, the oneness of all life, because of the fact that some people might, as Roger mentioned, some people might interpret it as being an excuse against going vegan. But I think that we can recognize the oneness of all life while also understanding there's a difference between sentient beings like animals and plants. Yeah. Yeah,
as I said, my objection is not particularly profound. It's just it just makes me think of that kind of little glitch to it, really, in that sense. Do you want to move on?
Sure. Right. So speaking of ahimsa, this The Pillars of Ahimsa were written by J. Dinshaw. He was the founder of the American Vegan Society, and he wrote these in 1966. He used the Pillars of Ahimsa to help people to understand the vegan ethic. And so within this, I think that harmlessness with reverence for life and service to humanity, nature, and creation, I mean, that is somewhat religious sounding language, but I think that both of those points point to broader environmentalist concerns within veganism. Does anyone have any opinions?
Actually, Philip's in the chat. Philip will have, I'm sure, something to say, interesting stuff to say about this, because he's very connected with the American Vegan Society and kind of Ahimsa and all of those kind of philosophies. I don't know if you have any comments on this, Philip, but yeah, I suppose it goes back to again, we're talking of reverence for life and creation. I suppose it's that language that brings, like you said, Carolyn, brings to mind religious overtones, and are we then kind of blurring those lines of plant life, animal life, and things like that? So I guess it kind of plays on that sort of concepts again, but it definitely seems to fit with, obviously, the scope of veganism in terms of expanding that to the wider than human world.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's possible to have a kind of a respect for plants, even though that respect is necessarily going to be different to the respect that we have for sentient beings.
Yeah, which is what Tom Reagan said in the case for animal rights. In fact, he even said that inanimate objects and plant life could be seen as rights bearers, or at least a plausible argument can be made, although it will be a different one to the rights view, because they're not seen as individuals. But of course, a forest is made up of individual trees, so I suppose you can see where he was kind of playing with on that one, which I thought was quite interesting. One technical thing about this one, when I was putting together the PowerPoint, I noticed that you're talking about Jay's foundation of the American Vegan Society, but in this one, you say the founder of the first vegan society in the United States. So,
yeah,
do you know the difference between
the
two?
Catherine Nimmo and another activist co-founded the first vegan society, which there isn't much documentation of it. It sounds like it was probably a more loosely organized vegan society. And when that one shut down, Jay founded the American Vegan Society in 1960, and apparently Catherine Nimmo became one of the first members of the American Vegan Society. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just interesting, the dates, isn't it? 1948, much closer to the foundation of the British Society than we tend to, when we talk about the North American one, to locate it around about 1960. Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting 48 to 60, and then 60 onwards. But two different things, yeah.
Yeah, apparently Catherine Nimmo and her co-activists distributed copies of the vegan news from the UK.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that'd be very interesting to vegan filmmaker Andy Atkinson, because he's always wondering about whether they used their early materials as kind of like pamphlets or leaflets and everything. And of course, they wouldn't have had the facilities that we have now, but it's interesting to find out that was the case. Mm-hmm. Do you want to go to the next one?
Sure. Right. So, Feminists for Animal Rights was founded in the early 1980s. And I wanted to mention Feminists for Animal Rights because they took an ecofeminist perspective. So they were, of course, showing the connections between, as you can see in the top clipping, the patriarchal domination of women, nature, and our fellow animals. I just wanted to read this little quote from the left-hand side from this article by Marty Keel. I think it was published in 1990. And the entire article was about how she and some others were trying to advocate that the Greens in the United States take animal liberation seriously, basically. Anyway, she said, if feminism may be said to have a single underlying theme, it must surely be that of making connections. Connecting the personal with the political, the mind with the body, reason with emotion. All these dualities of patriarchal culture are viewed as differing aspects of a single whole. From a feminist perspective, animal liberation is not an isolated phenomenon, but rather a part of a larger movement which seeks respect for all forms of life. So,
well, my first thought about that is that one of the complaints about people who object to this line is that we're asking veganism to do more than other movements, and that we don't say to feminists you should be anti-racist and everything, but we do say that to the vegan movement. This is the allegation, to the extent that that's true. Normally it was organic, as far as I remember from the 90s, that that if you would suddenly get a genocide as we have now, most people would have a position on it based on the fact that they don't want the mass genocide of children, for example, right? Apart from the other kind of political aspects of, say, Palestine and Israel. But in terms of asking for veganism to do more than other movements, that's exactly what the founders said, that we can't see veganism as just another movement. It was more than that. They almost saw it as, because in presentations in the past, I don't know what you think about this panel, as it were, is that Watson almost got a little bit arrogant about it, because he started talking about other movements as lesser movements, because their scope didn't include everything, and it was kind of single issue and focused. And he said that we've got a focus, but we've got that wider perspective. And so when Cross talked about the principles that you could apply, Cross saw that as a kind of searchlight that, again, you could apply. You could move it around and say, okay, let's look at this issue, let's look at that issue. And so the objection to this kind of view is missing the mark, in my view, because the vegan movement is supposed to be a bit over and above. So I don't know whether that is arrogant, really, on their behalf, or whether that's something that we should drop because of that. I've always struggled with that point a little bit.
Well, I think if we look at the work of the founders, they didn't really talk about things like feminism, for example, but if we take vegan principles and sort of combine them with feminism, we find that they go really well together, I think.
Yeah, and of course we do have, in a sense, we only have hints to it, because I mean, obviously second wave feminism wasn't there. They don't talk about animal rights in a kind of Reagan sense, because that this was like 40 years earlier than that, and so that would be the reason for that. But when you got Cross talking about the surge of freedom and saying that veganism is part of this surge towards freedom on a wide front, then I would have thought that those points were implied, if not actually stated by that. I mean, the first sentence of that essay, which was his last philosophical essay about veganism, the first sentence ends with, "What can veganism do for humanity?" Because although they saw it as a focus and scope thing, and Cross's language there is broad aspects, the first broad aspect, the second broad aspect, they weren't frightened about talking about the second one first, if that makes sense. It wasn't an issue there. Whereas you kind of get jumped on nowadays for not talking about our fellow animals first and making sure that everybody understands that that's the focus. They were a bit looser about that now, then, I think.
Maybe we can go to the next slide.
Okie dokie.
Right, so this was from an article by Marty Keel, who co-founded Feminists for Animal Rights. This article was from 1991, and it refers to the Gulf War. So she wrote, There are many uncounted victims of this war, but perhaps the most overlooked victims of all are those that belong to the non-human world. Who is there to count their dead bodies or to know the pain and suffering that they have endured? Who even cares? As the Middle East copes with the most massive ecological disaster in history, innumerable animals have been among the first to die. I think this is powerful, and it reminds us that war harms free-living animals. I know some people in the movement have been suggesting that the only other animals who are being killed by the bombs are individuals who would have been killed anyway, like so-called farmed animals. But that's not correct. I mean, many free-living animals are harmed by war.
Well, it's, I mean, nobody is farming mice and rats, and they're going to be killed. Butterflies, birds. In fact, when we come to Nella's slides, we're going to see evidence of that in a kind of, it's not a war situation, but it could have well been, as we'll see a little later on.
Yeah.
And it seems, I think this kind of highlights a little bit as well of how if we keep the human versus animal, the false dichotomy that we have with that we don't kind of see ourselves as animals as well. We have this hierarchy, and this speciesist hierarchy is that when we separate ourselves out from fellow animals, that this is what happens is during war, during famine, during ecological disasters, our fellow animals are always the ones who get kind of ignored by the wayside. And we saw that when there was that kind of people were trying to get other animals out of was it Ukraine back in the beginning of the war? It might have been Ukraine, and there was a big push to get other animals out of the country. It might have been a different war. You lose track of the wars these days, but there was a lot of pushback to that, in that people were saying you're putting animals first. Like, you should be focusing on getting the humans out. You're bringing animals out when the humans aren't even saved, and you get that kind of pushback. And of course, this is because of that speciesist hierarchy that we have. So when we look at liberation as total liberation, and of breaking down, dismantling speciesist hierarchies and breaking down that false dichotomy of human animal, that can only really benefit us if we change the status, that kind of inferior status of fellow animals.
Yeah, Ronnie, I was talking about the Gulf War there. I mean, all wars are disastrous for everybody that's involved. And especially now, when you don't actually have like armies fighting each other, the wars have been fought from the air now, aren't they? I mean, let's face it. I think that as vegan, this is a good point, and there was one earlier. Actually, apologies, we've kind of gone past that, but I think this is a fair point. What makes veganism more than the movement is not the burden to advocate for all human rights issues, and I don't think anybody. I think that's an allegation made, but I've never actually met anybody who says that we've got to, as it were, sign up for everything. It's more to do with the fact that you would automatically see the interlinks and the interlinkages there. And that, so it would be kind of almost like a mindset rather than a signing up. So I don't think the point is that we are duty bound to advocate for everything. It's just that it's almost like, well, in my experience, everybody did anyway. And I think you said the same, Wendy. When you think about when we joined the movement, everybody was doing everything all the time, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a lot less siloed, I suppose, in that way. It was much more kind of people just got involved with lots of different things, and it was much more, I can't think of my words very well tonight, my brain's so hot. It's really hot in this room. But yeah, there was a lot more collaboration between different things, and just standing up for different parts of the different movements as well. Another thing that just came to mind then, and now I think I might have lost it, I was in a train of thought to do with what you were saying. What were you just saying, Roger? Remind me. You can't remember either now, can you?
I've got to remember 5 minutes ago. You're joking.
No, literally 1 minute.
What was I saying? I don't know.
I was just thinking that claiming that free living beings, are, veganism it must not be concerned with free living beings, is in itself speciesist. I mean, if we were talking about displaced, killed, bombed humans, we would say that they are oppressed. We ought to say the same about our fellow animals. We have double standards. Double standards are specific anyway. Why someone should be the object of economic exploitation in order to be the focus of veganism. Not to mention that all these natural catastrophes and wars have mean financial gain for some corporations and states, individuals.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I see a distinct moral difference between what you're just talking about there, Nella, and the idea that we're supposed to intervene between a lion and an antelope, which I don't think is part of veganism or animal rights. But in terms of things like war and things that we've done because of our own economic or colonial or kind of industrial things, well, then we are directly impacting on the homes of others, and so it seems to me that that's a vegan issue. Reagan talked about the biotic community because he was kind of engaging with the environmentalists at the time, and they were focused on the biotic community as a whole, and he was focused on the individuals within it. And so I think that's the way that we can see it. Obviously, all communities are made up of individuals.
And so when you got involved in the movement in the earlier days, like, were people within the movement like doing advocacy related to protecting ecosystems?
I don't remember that particularly. The examples I always give is from this is 1980s now, early 80s, was that I used to know that we had people going sabbing, and then we would have a national demo, or even people on kind of NAL type things, which kind of raids and that kind of stuff. But then during the week they would be at Rock Against Racism gigs and Reclaim the Night events. Everybody was a member of CND. And so there was those interlinks there. In terms of environmental stuff, I think the boycott of Nestle was big on that. And you remember that, Wendy, because I didn't know any vegan who would buy anything from Nestle or Unilever.
Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, all of those, they were the devil. You just wouldn't touch them. And there used to be flyers going around actually with pictures of all the products from those companies on them, and it just stays in my mind now. Even as soon as I go in the supermarket, I kind of know which products are going to be Unilever, Procter & Gamble. It's like no, I don't even consider, they're not even on the radar. It's like you just wouldn't. Whereas now, of course, a lot of these brands are bringing out so-called vegan options or vegan friendly versions of products under their umbrella. So it's become a lot more complex now with that, and parent companies and things like that. It's really almost impossible now to get something that's purely vegan friendly without any ethical difficulties, if you trace it back to like holding companies, parent companies and all that kind of thing. No pure land, as you say.
Yeah, no pure land. I was shocked when I gave a talk at the Paris Vegan Day in a supermarket. I noticed that Nestle had their own fair trade label. I couldn't believe it. Nestle having a fair trade label just seems like taking the piss to me.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Should we move on, Carolyn?
Sure. Right. So the vegan source book, I really wanted to include this because it's hard to see in the image, but on the cover of the vegan source book, this is the second edition, there's a recommendation from Tom Regan. He said that something along the lines of, this is the most comprehensive account of vegan ethics to date, or something like that. And so this book is written by Jo Stepaniak, and she wrote, "Veganism advocates harmony, justice, and empathic living by acknowledging and respecting the interconnectedness of all life. Embracing veganism compels practitioners to live moral and compassionate lives while minimizing their impact on the earth and its resources. It instills active and vibrant responsibility for initiating positive social change by presenting a constant challenge to consistently seek out the highest ideal." And now I want to say as well, these quotes that I've picked out are primarily focusing on the scope of veganism, because that's, we wanted to talk about ecological issues and holistic social justice issues. But I totally agree that the focus of veganism is on non-human animals.
Yeah.
And none of us would disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the point I was going to make about this is that the allegation is that whenever we use a quote like this or talk about the scope or the second broad aspect of veganism, it's a threat to the focus. Now, I've never known anyone suggesting that we should kind of make the scope the focus. I've never known anybody doing that. But the allegation is often that you've got, since a BLM, for example, we've got vegan activists actively persuading other vegans to transfer from doing vegan work or animal rights work to do human rights work. And again, I don't know a single instance. And whenever you ask for names, they're not usually forthcoming. So I don't know whether this fear that is bouncing around the movement at the moment is actually made up or not, or the size of it. But I've actually never met anybody who would try to convince me that I should not be going there, I should be going there instead.
I think there's a little nuance to that, actually. I think sometimes the criticism of looking at things from a more holistic viewpoint is that I think activists feel that they're being told to consider the oppressor. It's like, don't consider fellow animals as much as you're considering the oppressor. Like, you have to bear in mind what the oppressor's going through, what the oppressor's situation is, when actually they're looking at fellow animals as the victims and the oppressors. So there's that duality, isn't there as well? Going back to Marty Keel's framing duality, and I think that's more the criticism, rather than being, I think some people have been said, people, we've been told to have an opinion on everything, on every human issue, on every human war, on every movement, get involved in every movement, which obviously, as we know, isn't true. None of us are really out there doing masses of other movement sort of protests and things. We're very focused on our fellow animals. I think it's that criticism that I hear the most from activists, is this is not about the oppressor, and the human is the oppressor, basically. And I think it's there that a lot of the antagonism sits with this issue.
Do you think the language of oppressor has any merit? Is it of any use, given the fact that we're in a social movement made up and run by human beings? So the species that is the oppressor, which none of us will dispute, is also the liberator species. Yeah,
it's very true. It's a very complicated and much more nuanced probably than other movements, because actually, although fellow animals are the grassroots, they are the center of this movement, a lot of mobilization is obviously we humans, who are also the oppressor. So it's very much more complicated in a way. You don't really get that in another movement. There's no real direct comparison with other movements with that situation, I don't think.
I think the language some people use causes confusion. This thing about it's not your movement, it's not about you, it's about them. Well, yeah, it's about them, but they're not running it. We're running it. It's our movement. We formed it. We're running it. There's a National Animal Rights March coming up next month, organized by the oppressor, according to this view. So what's the point? Does that mean that the people organizing NARM are oppressors? What's the point of using that language when they are trying to liberate our fellow animals? I think that language is confusing, I think.
I think their point is do not concern yourself with the liberation of humans, of those humans who are not vegan, and therefore they are still oppressing other animals. But this, this whole narrative disregards the nature of oppression itself and how one oppression fits the other, and how it is impossible to just liberate one group while other groups continue to be oppressed. But I agree with Wendy that the main criticism is that you are spending energy to liberate humans that are still oppressing other animals, and it also disregards politics of social movements. It disregards solidarity. It leaves a whole lot of humans outside, and it is not inclusive at all. And I don't see how you can turn the world vegan if you keep excluding, groups because they are not vegan yet.
Don't we want the oppressors to become the liberators? Like, for example, Tom Reagan, who was a butcher and then wrote the case for animal rights. There's been loads of butchers in the movement, well, I can't think of the names right now, but there's been lots and lots of vivisectors.
Slaughterhouse workers as well. I know a few people who.
That's right. Animal farmers are now opening sanctuaries and stuff. So the idea, because it's not as though by this construction of things, this interlink thing, this intersectional thing, that you're not allowed to challenge the oppressors. Of course you are. They're allowed to challenge us if we're sexist and racist. We're allowed to challenge them on their speciesism. Of course we are. That's the idea of it. That's the idea of alliance politics.
I think some people have been saying that when human rights issues are, quote, brought into, end quote, the movement, the vegan movement, then other animals get thrown under the bus. That's an argument that I've heard. But the thing is, first of all, human issues are already in the movement. And if you think about someone like Marty Keel and Feminists for Animal Rights, Feminists for Animal Rights did focus on both the issues of sexism and speciesism. And Marty Keel would go to feminist groups and, try to help them to understand animal liberation issues. So it's not true that if we take human rights seriously, that we're necessarily throwing other animals under the bus.
Do you know what that phrase even means, Carolyn?
Like just dismissing their concerns and just sort of sacrificing them in the name of human rights. I think that's what some people have been saying.
Well, which vegan is going to do that? Is there a single vegan that is going to do that?
Well, it's not in alignment with the vegan ethic to disregard our fellow animals.
No. So, you see, I think there's a lot of these little slogans being thrown around, which, when you start to examine them, don't really have much cohesion, it seems to me. Would you like to move on?
Sure. Oh yeah, this is Joan Denaire. She is an important animal rights theorist and author in the movement. And in 2004, she said, with the possible exception of the right not to be murdered by humans, the most important right for free non-humans probably is the right to their habitats. Steve Sapontsis has voiced the possibility of expanding our concept of property to include non-human territory. I think we need to do this. I certainly think that non-human animals need to have the right to their habitats. I think the idea of saying that their habitat is their property is an interesting concept, and I'm not really sure what I think about it.
Well, I mean, that tends to go back to John Locke, is the idea that you mix your labor with something and then it becomes your property. But so the test case there was about beavers and about are the dams made by beavers their property, right? And there was a case, I believe, where the beavers had blocked up a stream, which was affecting humans downstream. And there was a court case because the humans wanted to destroy the beavers' homes. And I can't remember the outcome of it, but I do remember that was like a test case of this idea of our fellow animals owning property as opposed to being property.
It's interesting when you get those conflicts of interest, isn't it, between humans and fellow animals, or even one set of fellow animals and another set of fellow animals. It's like it's murky area. Someone was telling me the other day how they smoked out a nest of wasps and tried to get them to move because they tried to be this person is not a vegan, by the way, but they smoked out a nest of wasps and tried to get them away. But then, obviously a lot of them would have died, but it was like, she said, it was becoming just unlivable like that. And I was thinking, it just obviously immediately for a vegan, it's like, and I actually said, well, I guess the thing is, like, if we had a conflict of interest with another human, we wouldn't just instinctively resort to killing them. We would fight. We would, like, no stone would be unturned before we found another solution. We would have to. We wouldn't just go, oh, well, I don't think I can think of anything. Oh, I know, I'll kill them. Do you know what? And I suppose it's that initial sort of mindset to, let's just get rid of them. Let's destroy this. Let's kill them. And it's the easier option for some people. And it's really sad and upsetting.
Exactly. The very positive thing about the animal rights case is the fact that then if we understand that we're dealing with other rights bearers, then any conflict that arises is, as you say, Wendy, between rights bearers then, rather than, we are the master species, or, we are the superior ones, so we can do what we want. That would ultimately rule out that kind of reaching for the gun or the poison kind of aspect to it all.
Yeah, or the chainsaw. I recently had a massive bit of a falling out, really, with my neighbours who are trying to chop some trees down. And I've been to the council, got a tree preservation order, and then had to go to a council committee to Ronnie knows all about this, Ronnie, my tree saga, and ended up saving only one of the trees, sadly. One of two. One tree has been saved, and they've been allowed to kill the other one. But of course, I made my point actually in the council chambers. This tree is not only about humans. There are many non-human people relying on this tree. I hope you're going to consider those. And they actually took it seriously, which was really encouraging as well.
Did they ask you who they vote for?
If they could vote, they would be protected.
Yeah, as Jeremy said, Joan Denea's work is well worth seeking out. It is a bit expensive nowadays, isn't it, Carolyn?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are maybe a couple of essays or a few of her essays online for free. But yeah, I especially recommend her book, Animal Equality, Language and Liberation.
Thumbs up from the general there for you, Wendy.
Oh, thanks, General.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to move on, Carolyn?
Yeah, all right. Right. Okay, so this, I'm not sure if we're going to have time for this one. Well, okay, we can. I suppose we can. What would you like to do?
Is this starting the next subject, Carolyn? The moral impossibility.
It's kind of blending into the next subject, which I'm not sure we're going to have time for.
That means you have to come back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could.
Yeah, that would
be great.
That wouldn't be too horrendous for us, would it? So
no, that'd be lovely, because actually, I think that subject is really interesting and probably will warrant its own show, for sure.
Yes, well, I tell you what we could do is we could transfer to Nella's slides, because those are more relevant to what we've talked about rather than what we're going to move on to talk about, and then maybe discuss the idea of a second show, if you're willing to come back, Carolyn, to do that as a focus of it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, so there we go. So here's the hero.
Oh, bless
No
you.
heroes here. The only hero is that baby tortoise who managed to stay alive, had sustained burns, and she's very young. She's only 3 years old, and she's the only hero there. We've been, facing wildfires. This is something that always happened in this part of the world, but with the climate emergency and everything, it's nowadays it happens more often. And the rate it's happening now, it's very alarming. I have like new fires every day. So I've been.
So you're part of the team going up into the mountains, essentially.
Yes. What happens is after a small team of specially trained people, trained by the fire department, go during the fire to see the extent of the fire, the area that is, burned down, and then to study the terrain and the biodiversity maps. Then in the next 48 hours, we organize a search and rescue, and we go in the area affected by the fire to find wounded and dead individuals in order to to have more data about the species affected, where they were affected, and things like that, which are later analyzed by the scientists who do that. And it has been devastating. And
yeah, but the majority of pictures that you provided, Nella, are obviously of tortoises, and presumably there's more of those still there because they can't get away as quick, right?
Yes, and also because they are very resilient. So even in an area completely burned down, you can find alive ones even a few days after the fire. We also found many snakes, lizards, and small mammals, but mainly we've been dealing with tortoises and snakes.
Okay, let me move on to the next one. So the one on the left there gives you some idea about the extent of this problem.
It does, and at the beginning I thought that the worst thing I could see was like the burnt bodies of our fellow animals, which is very distressing, of course, and the injured ones that that are in distress and in pain. But there is something I hadn't considered, and that's going to a burned down forest and find no signs of life at all. And that means no live individuals, no dead individuals. And
is there any arguments that you've heard from environmentalists, for example, that this is a natural thing that happens, and it's a little bit like grouse moors, they actually deliberately set them on fire. So the idea is that the earth will recover stronger after this, rather than if it never happened. Is that an argument you'll come across?
not really, because while I was growing up, we always had fires, and it was not happening that often. Now the thing that's happening now is unprecedented. It's like beyond tragic. It's dystopic, and the truth is that the nature does not recover from that. We go to areas that were burned a couple of years ago, so the vegetation is still low, and the biodiversity is greatly affected. So we don't really know how many years a mountain or a forest needs to recover, and if it's going to recover. We know that tortoises play a very crucial role in that, healing of the forest, and but there is so much we don't know. And the thing is that when we went to areas that were burned for the second or the third time, we didn't find many signs of life, which was very distressing. Of course, when I go there, when we all go there, we don't wish to find injured and dead animals. But if you go there and find no one, it's also very distressing, because you know that tortoises didn't have the time to escape. They just weren't there in the first place. And this is also due to...
What I'm really getting at is, are we talking about what would be called a natural phenomena, or has it been made worse because of human activity?
It could be arson in some cases, but usually is fires that start due to the dryness and heat and usual temperatures that makes and wind a very easy for a wildfire to start. But I consider all those to be human activity. I mean, the climate crisis is the result of human activity anyway. But there are other factors like pollution or the use of chemicals for the crops that can affect the biodiversity.
So it's you've seen light, in real life, in live in action, how important it is that we respect ecosystems and biodiversity and look at our human practices in terms of the effect the detrimental effect that it has on our fellow animals who are free living, their environments, their homes, the forests, the land that they're living on, the resources that they need. You're basically seeing that in real time there, I would say.
Yeah, in a way, I think I've seen the future and is dystopic. That's what I felt when I was in the burned wood the last time, that this was the future and the future was dystopic. And I was thinking, how is it possible for anyone to deny how interdependent we are with the forest and the other animals and the plants and the trees and everything? How can we disrespect that?
I think because as humans we are so disconnected now. Like we've moved so far away from our natural, the way that we've evolved, living out in nature, connected to each other. We're just so disconnected that it seems like we find it strange that we're affected by the environment and climate change. It's almost like we think we're just in a separate little bubble, a human little separate bubble. And I think in a way we are, but we're not really. We are very affected, but of course, we are so disconnected. It's a shame. One thing I wanted to ask you, Nella, actually, the team that you're with, are they mostly vegans, or is it a mixture of vegans, non-vegans? And how does that play out in terms of, when you're there and how you feel about it and all of that, the conversations that are being had?
Yeah, it's a mixture of people. I think that vegans are the minority. I'm really happy when I go and I look around and I see the team and I spot vegans, people I know. Really happy about that. I don't understand how can someone worry and care about the tortoise to the point that they, decide to climb a mountain and go in the ashes and the smoke to try to help them, and later consume the flesh of another animal. I cannot. I cannot understand that. I just hope that there are people in their way to become vegan, because what I see is that they really care about wildlife. They don't care about. They're not environmentalists that care about the impact of this destruction to humans. they sincerely care about the tortoises and the snakes and all these individuals that we found there. So I'm hopeful. I've been very lucky, and when we drive there, we're trying to minimize our environmental, footprint. So we try to use as few cars as possible. So I've been going to the sites with a couple of people that are vegetarian, and we had very interesting conversations, and they are looking into veganism now. It's always a relief to know that there are vegans around, especially because you never know what you're going to find when you go there. There's always the possibility that you will find the so-called farm animals in distress, and it feels different to be amongst vegans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these two pictures were to illustrate the diversity of our fellow animals who were affected, because mainly tortoises, but then we've got rats. And you think the hair caught in the branches or the sticks is fox hair?
Yes, it's fox. I have some other pictures, and it's clear that this was a fox cub, but they were very distressing. So it just shows this one.
Yeah, we weren't sure whether to offer a kind of mild trigger warning, because Nella's got some, as it were, more graphic images than this. But so we were trying to be careful about what we show. So the tortoises who found kind of refuge,
Yeah,
they did okay.
Yeah. No, this one is dead. This one is dead. She tried to save herself, but she didn't manage to.
Oh, right. Okay. And then I think there's the last one, which is, yeah, that one there. And so snails to the left. And then again, just the scale of the devastation. It's kind of, well, again, you see, I mean, what if that was a war zone? Is that not a vegan issue?
Well done, Nella. Well done to you and the team, because I know you were going out there a lot, and I can only imagine how harrowing that was, but also how rewarding it was as well to find those individuals and be able to help them, and be able to help them, go forward into their lives with some care. So well done, and yeah, I hope
they're a great team. If anyone wants to look at their Facebook page, is Save Your Hood Greece, and the person who started that started with cleaning forests and the seaside, because this is the home of our fellow animals. So and then the wildfires happened again, and we all got involved with the search and rescue. They are doing really great work, and it takes a lot of preparation and organization for a team to get there. I'm really happy I found them. I'm really happy I found them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, we're about 10 minutes over, so maybe this is a good time.
Roger, I was just thinking, did we use the banner? Could we bring Carolyn's banner up, and then?
No, we didn't, did we? We went to all the trouble, spending hours and hours making this.
Carolyn,
I do have a little question for everyone. I know that someone had said on his blog that he is vegan for free living animals, because in a vegan world, they would be the only non-human animals. And I was also thinking about how, I think Wendy was saying that people are often disconnected from nature. There are initiatives to get people to go out into nature, into the woods more. I wonder if initiatives like that would actually help with vegan advocacy, because if people were more connected with and more aware of free living animals and, well, non-human animals in general and nature, would that actually help make it easier to do vegan advocacy? And to encourage people to become vegan? If you don't mind me asking.
I think that maybe for me comes with pros and cons. I think the more, and actually reading the article that we're going to come on to in our part 2 with you, the proximity effect, when humans have proximity with our fellow animals in different ways, like often humans who have, fellow animals living with them, so-called, family members, animal companions, however you want to think of it, they often are more open to those individuals having empathy, having feelings, having emotions, being very sentient, having emotional lives, compared to animals they might consider as so-called food animals, like pigs, for example. So the proximity effect is quite strong. So I think those kind of initiatives could be beneficial for people to connect. But I think also it comes with the other side, is that we are also entering the homes as well of these individuals. The same as when people go to, say, like in Canada, when they go whale watching and things like that, I often wonder how intrusive that is for the whales that were coming into their homes. People go scuba diving and they have this connection and they love these individuals and seeing them, but then we're also intruding into their homes. And I wonder how that is affecting them and their lives, because obviously everything we do affects them. They adapt to us and our practices. They're also adapting and evolving in that way. So I suppose it's just trying to do it in a very mindful way, in a vegan way, I guess, in terms of trying to be very thoughtful and mindful of how we approach these initiatives and how much intrusion we create into their lives. That would be my take on it, I suppose.
Well, I believe it's a case that there's been quite a few incidents lately where whales have tipped boats over. Maybe that's because they're just a little bit fed up of being an exhibit,
Yeah. And monkeys throwing stones at visitors in prisons, so-called zoos. They collect stones and throw stones and throw feces at them. I'm like, go monkey.
Dirty protest. Going back to your question, Carolyn, when you said that a vegan who is a vegan for free living beings, what does it mean by being for? Because the overwhelming idea about free living beings from a vegan point of view has always been leave them alone. But whether that would be the case now, I'm not quite sure. So what does for them mean?
Well, I guess I would have to go back to the article and see, but I guess one way we could think about it is also the fact that animal agribusiness destroys the habitat of these other animals. I mean, that could be one way of looking at it too. I think this person is basically just saying that he wants to see a world in which these other animals are allowed to thrive. But yeah, I'd have to go back and see what he was saying specifically.
Do they perhaps mean that all animals will be free living beings in a vegan world, which I'm not sure will be the case, but is that the point they make?
I think that was part of it. Actually, I just pulled it up. He said, who are we vegan for ultimately? This is Dave Shishkoff from veganfidelity.com. He says, at some point in a future vegan world, so he's saying that there would be very few cows, pigs, and chickens, and hopefully all living peacefully on sanctuaries. I would say in a vegan world that we wouldn't need to have sanctuaries. But anyway, he says that the majority of animal kind will be wildlife and free living animals once again. They will be the ones to inherit the vast amounts of land currently devoted to livestock, as we welcome the wilderness to reclaim these spaces. For me, they're the real reason I'm vegan. Their lives and communities will be our legacy for millennia and will be the ones to benefit from the change we inspired. So that was what he said about that.
I wonder if we would have sanctuaries, actually, because I guess there are still going to be fellow animals who will get injured, who will get hurt in some way, who will maybe get sick. I wonder if we actually would still have some kind of sanctuary
hospital,
or hospital. Yeah, hospital. All those. Yeah, I mean, the ideal would be to help rehabilitate if you could, and then.
It's an interesting question, though, isn't it? Because, in fact, in one of the Leslie Cross essays, he said that he wanted to live long enough to see this process of, now we've got a vegan world, now what? And it's interesting because obviously a lot of the so-called farmed fellow animals would go to sanctuaries, but then does that mean we would prevent them from reproducing? And so it would be kind of that old Peter slogan, one generation and out kind of thing, because that in a way is a rights violation to do that. But we're trying to undo a problem of our own making, humans, I mean. So, doing it kind of cleanly and smoothly and without problems on a moral basis seems unrealistic to me.
Very unrealistic, impossible, I'd say. Even now it's impossible, isn't it? And I'm sure Jeremy was mentioning earlier the difficulties of trying to protect some individuals from other individuals, some individuals that are living in sanctuary where other individuals are free living, and the conflict that arises between them and all things like that, which we all probably are aware of, especially if we live with fellow animals.
I don't think that's a conflict that a lot of people think about, actually. Do you really? In other words, you've got a sanctuary and then free living beings visit, as it were. And I'm not quite sure that many vegans think about that.
Yeah, I think about it on a smaller scale with cats and birds and mice and rats, because there is obviously conflict there, and it's trying to navigate and manage those situations as best you can.
Yeah, well, okay, so we shall be back, figure out other ways of putting Respect Animal Sanctuary out of business. So
Jeremy would love that if we put him out of business. He could go and play his little ukulele then, just sit in a field and play his ukulele, couldn't you, Jeremy? Without having to worry.
Well, I think also in a vegan world, the free living animals could learn not to be afraid of humans anymore. So we might actually find ourselves being closer to free living animals if that's what they wanted.
Yeah, that was one of the most beautiful parts of Fetid Kingdoms. And when I read that part, I think Gary Francione said the same about that particular part where John Bryant, the author, was saying they would lose their fear that humanity was no longer a threat to them, and so they would join us on a country walk for a while and then go their own way and everything, as kind of just companions in a wood for a while. And if we could get back to that kind of situation, or get to that's never existed, I don't know. It does sound like a very idyllic kind of setup, really.
They might just think we're shitheads.
That reminds me.
Right,
we get some trainings with the search and rescue group, and we had a training about how to approach wildlife, and depending on the species, and how to do triage and first aid and things like that. And I remember that the doctor said, bear in mind that for those individuals, you represent the greatest danger, not the fire. In their minds, you are the greatest danger, and that stayed with me. And I hope that in a vegan world, we'll have the chance to redeem ourselves and not be the greatest danger for them.
Yeah. So is there a general guideline, like, for example, not making eye contact or something like that, or what you get told to do or not do?
It has to do with the way you touch them and you hold them and you try to restrict their movement in order to to give them first aid, things like that. And especially with larger individuals that can run away or that they can attack, feeling that they are, they are in danger.
Yeah, that would be so tragic, wouldn't it? You're trying to save them, and you actually drive them into somewhere more dangerous. That would be horrible, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I can see the dilemma there. Right, so I'll try and close down for the 4th time.
Can we just have Carolyn tell us where we can listen to her brilliant podcast?
Thank you. Yeah, it's alwaysforanimalrights.blogspot.com. I mean, the website is where everything is laid out really neatly, but I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, but I don't post very much unless I have a new episode out.
And the last guest was Ronnie, I believe, and it was a really good interview.
Thanks.
I don't know how you kept him under control.
No.
We can't.
Ronnie doesn't have a lot to say, though, does he, really? It must have been a difficult one.
Yeah, you have to tease it out of him.
I remember when I did my interview with Ronnie, I had to cut it into 2 parts. Had to make two episodes and leave a lot on the cutting room floor, which we won't say any more about, Ronnie, will we? But yeah, no, Ronnie's a great guest.
Yeah.
Well, you could use that for blackmail purposes, except that he's got no shame. He's got no shame, so it wouldn't work, would it?
He just absolutely wouldn't be bothered.
Right, everyone. Thanks very much for sticking with us as ever, and we will be back probably sooner than we knew, because Carolyn has agreed to come back, which is great. And so, until then, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.